Maggie Thompson sat at her kitchen table, the chipped oak surface cluttered with unopened bills and a half-empty mug of chamomile tea gone cold. The Ohio dusk filtered through her lace curtains, painting the room in shades of gray, much like her mood. At 68, she felt like the world had moved on without her, her small town of Willow Creek fading as fast as her own dreams. The radio hummed in the background, a crackly voice announcing Tesla's latest milestone, 1 million electric cars produced, pushing America closer to a zero-emission future. Maggie snorted softly. Good for them, she muttered, stirring her tea with a spoon she hadn't washed in days. What's that got to do with me? The question lingered, heavier than the damp air pressing against her single-pane windows. What did anything have to do with her anymore? Her days blurred into one another. Mornings spent flipping through old photo albums, afternoons napping through game shows, evenings staring at the ceiling, wondering where the years had gone. She was a retired schoolteacher, once the heart of Willow Creek High's history department, but now? Now she was just Maggie, the widow who lived at the end of Maple Street, the one whose daughter hadn't called in years. She reached for her ancient laptop, a clunky thing Tom had bought her a decade ago before the cancer took him. The screen flickered to life, casting a bluish glow across her wrinkled hands. She didn't know why she opened it, maybe to check the weather, maybe to scroll through the local paper's obituaries, a grim habit she'd picked up. Instead, her fingers, almost on their own, typed Elon Musk into the search bar. She'd heard his name on the radio, tied to that Tesla story. The man who built cars that didn't need gas, who shot rockets into space, who seemed to defy every rule of what was possible. Maggie wasn't sure why she cared, but something about his name stuck, like a splinter in her mind. A video popped up, an interview from some tech conference, the kind of thing she'd never watch. Elon Musk leaned forward in a chair, his voice sharp but earnest, his eyes glinting with something Maggie hadn't felt in years, conviction. The only thing stopping you is your own mind, he said, his words cutting through the static of her thoughts. If you think you can't do something, you've already lost. But if you start, really start, there's no limit to what you can build. Maggie froze, her hand hovering over the mouse. Her heart thudded, a rare jolt of life in her tired chest. She replayed the clip, then again, each time letting his words sink deeper. What if he was right? What if everything she'd told herself about being too old, too tired, too broken was just wrong? The thought was absurd, almost embarrassing, but it wouldn't let go. She glanced around her kitchen. The peeling wallpaper, the dusty clock ticking too loudly, the photo of her and Tom at Niagara Falls, smiling like they had forever. She didn't feel like that Maggie anymore. But what if she could? Her eyes drifted to a stack of old journals in the corner, their leather covers worn from years of neglect. She'd written in them once, back when she was young and foolish enough to dream of writing a book, a collection of stories about the unsung heroes of small-town America, people like the farmers and teachers who'd shaped Willow Creek. She'd abandoned that dream somewhere between raising Sarah, teaching 30 kids a day, and keeping Tom's spirits up through chemo. But now, alone in her quiet house, with Musk's voice still echoing in her head, she wondered, what if it's not too late? The radio droned on about Tesla's mission to drive the world toward a sustainable future. Maggie didn't care much about electric cars, she'd never even seen a Tesla in Willow Creek, but the idea of a future felt like a challenge. Her future had felt finished, a book already written. But what if she could rip out the last page and start a new chapter? Her fingers trembled as she opened one of the journals, its pages yellowed but still blank at the back. She picked up a pen, her hand stiff from arthritis, and wrote one sentence. I'm not done yet. That it wasn't much, but it felt like a rebellion. She closed the laptop, the glow fading, but the spark in her chest didn't. She didn't know what came next, only that something had shifted, like a car switching gears. For the first time in years, Maggie Thompson didn't feel like she was just waiting to fade away. Hey, hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Maggie Thompson woke to the same creak of her bedroom floorboards, the same ache in her knees, the same silence that had settled over her house since Tom's death 5 years ago. The Ohio morning was chilly, the kind that made her bones feel brittle, and she pulled her faded quilt tighter around her shoulders as she shuffled to the kitchen. The journal she'd written in last night sat on the table, its single sentence, "I'm not done yet," staring back at her like a stranger's handwriting. In the light of day, it felt foolish, a fleeting spark snuffed out by the weight of reality. She was 68, a widow, a retired schoolteacher in a town that barely remembered her name. What was she thinking, chasing dreams inspired by some billionaire's words on a screen? She brewed coffee, the drip of the ancient machine a steady rhythm against the quiet. The kitchen smelled of stale bread and the faint lavender of her dish soap, scents that anchored her to this life, a life that felt smaller with every passing year. Maggie had taught history at Willow Creek High for 40 years, shaping young minds with stories of revolutions and dreamers, of people who changed the world. She'd been good at it, too, her classroom walls lined with maps and photos, her voice steady as she told her students, history isn't just the past, it's proof you can leave a mark. But now, her mark seemed erased. The school had a new teacher, her old colleagues had retired or moved away, and her students, now adults with lives of their own, rarely thought of Mrs. Thompson. She sat at the table, her coffee cooling, and let her gaze drift to the framed photo on the counter, her and Tom, 20 years ago, laughing at a county fair, her hair still auburn, his arms strong around her waist. Tom had been her anchor, her high school sweetheart, her partner in late-night lesson planning, her confidant when the world felt too heavy. When he got sick, she'd poured everything into keeping him alive, researching treatments, cooking his favorite meals, holding his hand through endless hospital visits. But cancer didn't care about love or effort. When he died, a part of Maggie went with him, leaving a hollow space she couldn't fill. Worse still was the rift with Sarah, their only daughter. Sarah had been 30 when Tom passed, living in Columbus with a job in marketing and a life that felt galaxies away from Willow Creek. The grief had fractured them. Maggie had wanted Sarah close, needed her to fill the quiet, but Sarah had pulled away, angry at the world, at Maggie, at the unfairness of it all. Their last fight, 3 years ago, still stung. "You act like you're the only one who lost him," Sarah had shouted, her voice breaking over the phone. "I can't be your crutch, Mom." The line went dead, and Sarah hadn't called since. Maggie sent birthday cards, left voicemails, but the silence grew, wound that festered with every unanswered message. Maggie's fingers traced the edge of the photo, her eyes stinging. She wasn't just mourning Tom or Sarah, she was mourning herself. The Maggie who'd once had big dreams, who'd stood in front of her class with fire in her voice, who'd believed she could do anything. In her 20s, fresh out of college, she'd had a wild idea, to write a book about the unsung heroes of small-town America, people like the Willow Creek farmer who'd saved his neighbors during a flood, or the librarian who'd taught 3 generations to read. She'd filled journals with notes, snippets of interviews, scraps of stories. But life got in the way, marriage, teaching, raising Sarah, then Tom's illness. The journals gathered dust in a closet, her dream buried under the weight of practicality. She stood, her knees protesting, and walked to the closet in the hallway. The door groaned as she opened it, revealing stacks of boxes, old coats, and, on a low shelf, the leather-bound journals. She pulled one out, its cover soft with age, and flipped through the pages. Her younger handwriting was bold, full of exclamation points and underlined phrases. Tell their stories. Make them matter. A yellowed newspaper clipping fell out, a 1978 article about a local woman who'd organized a food drive during a blizzard. Maggie had interviewed her, captivated by her quiet strength. She'd written, "This is why I'll write the book, to show the world that heroes don't always wear capes." Maggie's throat tightened. That young woman, so full of purpose, felt like a stranger. She'd let that dream slip away, telling herself there'd be time later, after Sarah's school plays, after Tom's doctor visits, after retirement. But later had arrived, and all she had was a house full of memories and a heart full of regrets. She closed the journal, her hands trembling. What was the point of digging up old dreams? She was too old, too tired, too alone. The world didn't need her stories, or her. She returned to the kitchen, the journal still in her hand, and glanced at the laptop. Elon Musk's words from last night echoed faintly, "The only thing stopping you is your own mind." She scoffed, but the words wouldn't leave her alone. Musk was a man who built electric cars and spaceships, who didn't let impossible stop him. She wasn't like him, she wasn't a genius or a billionaire, but something about his defiance felt personal, like a dare. He'd said something else in the interview, something about starting small but starting now. "You don't need to change the world overnight," he'd said. "Just take the first step, and the rest will follow." Maggie looked at the journal, then at the photo of her and Tom. She remembered a moment from their early days, when they'd sat on the porch of their first apartment, dreaming about the future. She'd told Tom about her book idea, and he'd grinned, his eyes bright. "You're gonna make people see the world differently, Maggie," he'd said. "I know you will." She hadn't believed him then, not fully, but his faith had kept her going. Now, with him gone, she wondered if she could find that faith in herself. She opened the journal again, her pen hovering over a blank page. Her hand ached, the arthritis worse in the mornings, but she pressed the pen down anyway. "What if I started again?" She wrote, the words shaky but deliberate. "What if I told one story, just one, and it mattered to someone?" She paused, her heart pounding. It wasn't a book, not yet, but it was something. A step. A spark. The radio crackled, announcing a community event in Willow Creek, a fundraiser for the library, struggling to stay open. Maggie had taught half the town's kids to love books in that library. She thought of the librarian from her old notes, the one who'd taught generations to read. Maybe her story could be the first. Maybe it wasn't too late to make someone's life matter again, starting with her own. Maggie closed the journal, her coffee untouched but her resolve warming. She didn't know if she could do this, didn't know if anyone would care. But for the first time in years, she wanted to try. She glanced at the laptop, tempted to watch that Musk interview again, to let his voice push her forward. Instead, she stood, her movements a little less heavy, and headed to the closet to find her old tape recorder. If she was going to tell stories, she'd need to start listening again. Maggie Thompson stood in her living room, the old tape recorder clutched in her hands, its weight both familiar and foreign. The Ohio morning was gray, the kind of damp chill that seeped into her joints, making every step a negotiation with her body. She'd pulled the recorder from a dusty box in the closet, its plastic casing scratched from years of use in her teaching days. The journals sat on the coffee table, their pages open to her scribbled notes from decades ago, names of Willow Creek locals, snippets of their stories, dreams she'd let die. Last night's spark, ignited by Elon Musk's words about defying limits, still flickered in her chest, but now, in the stark light of day, it felt fragile, like a match in a storm. She set the recorder down and sank into the worn armchair, its springs creaking under her weight. The room smelled of old books and the faint lemon polish she hadn't used in months. "What am I doing?" she thought, staring at the journal's open page. The sentence she'd written, "What if I told one story, just one, and it mattered to someone," looked naive now, almost childish. At 68, Maggie knew the world didn't wait for latecomers. Her daughter, Sarah, hadn't called in 3 years. Her neighbors barely waved anymore, their lives consumed by their own routines. Even her body seemed to betray her, her arthritis flaring, her energy fading. Who was she to think she could start over, to believe she could matter again? The question gnawed at her, is it too late? It wasn't just about the book or the stories. It was about her, whether Margaret Thompson, retired widow, had anything left to give. She'd spent 40 years teaching, pouring her heart into her students, but what did she have to show for it? A pension that barely covered the bills, a house that echoed with silence, a daughter who'd turned her back. The world had moved on, faster, shinier, younger. She thought of the Tesla factory milestone she'd heard on the radio, how it symbolized progress she couldn't keep up with. Electric cars, self-driving technology, a future she didn't understand. She felt like a relic, out of place in a world racing toward tomorrow. Maggie's gaze drifted to her laptop, still open on the kitchen table. She'd left the browser on that Elon Musk interview, his voice still ringing in her mind. The only thing stopping you is your own mind. She'd scoffed at it yesterday, but now it felt like a challenge she wasn't sure she could meet. Musk was a man who didn't accept limits, not time, not money, not even gravity. He built rockets when people said it was impossible, pushed for a world without fossil fuels when others laughed. Maggie wasn't trying to save the planet, but the idea of defying her own impossible stirred something deep. What if her age wasn't a barrier but just a number? She stood, wincing as her knees protested, and shuffled to the kitchen. The radio was on low, a local station reporting on Willow Creek's struggling library, the same one where she'd taught summer reading programs decades ago. The fundraiser was tomorrow, a last-ditch effort to keep it open. Maggie thought of Mrs. Clara, the librarian from her old notes, who'd turned that library into a haven for kids like Sarah. Clara's story was one Maggie had wanted to tell in her book, a quiet hero who'd changed lives without fanfare. Maybe that was where she'd start. One story. One step, but doubt crept in, cold and heavy. She imagined walking into the library, recorder in hand, asking for interviews. What would people say? There goes Maggie, chasing dreams at her age. She pictured her neighbor, Ed, with his skeptical squint, or worse, her doctor, Dr. Patel, who'd warned her last month to slow down after her blood pressure spiked. You're not 40 anymore, Margaret, he'd said, his tone kind but firm. Focus on staying healthy, not taking on new stress. The words had stung, a reminder that even those who cared saw her as fragile, finished. Society didn't expect much from a 68-year-old widow, and part of her had started to believe it. Maggie's phone buzzed, startling her. It was a text from her friend Ruth, one of the few people who still checked in. You coming to the library fundraiser tomorrow? We could use your smile. Maggie hesitated, her thumb hovering over the reply. Ruth was 72, spry and optimistic, always organizing bake sales or book clubs. Maggie envied her energy but felt exposed by it, too. If she went, she'd have to face people who'd see her as the sad widow, not the woman with a journal full of dreams. She typed a vague maybe and set the phone down, her chest tight. She turned back to the laptop, almost instinctively, and opened Twitter, or X, as they called it now. She wasn't much for social media, but Ruth had shown her how to use it to follow local news. On a whim, she searched for Elon Musk. A recent post popped up, retweeted by some tech account. Age is just a number. Impact is what matters. Keep pushing, no matter what they say. Maggie stared at the words, her pulse quickening. It was as if he was speaking to her, cutting through the fog of her doubts. Impact is what matters. She thought of Clara, of the library, of the kids she'd taught who still remembered her lessons. Maybe her impact wasn't over. Maybe it was just waiting. The flicker of hope grew, but it wasn't steady. Maggie closed the laptop and paced the living room, the floorboards groaning under her steps. She stopped at the mirror by the front door, catching her reflection, gray hair pulled into a loose bun, lines etched deep around her eyes, a face that carried too many years of loss. What's the point? She whispered, the question slipping out before she could stop it. The point of trying, of writing, of hoping, when the world had already written her off. She thought of Sarah, the silence between them a wound that never healed. If her own daughter didn't care, why would anyone else? But then Musk's words echoed again, if you think you can't, you've already lost. Maggie clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She wasn't Musk, she wasn't building cars or rockets, but she'd faced her own battles. She'd raised a daughter, cared for a dying husband, taught hundreds of kids to believe in themselves. Maybe that strength was still in her, buried but not gone. She returned to the coffee table, picked up the journal, and flipped to a blank page. Her hand shook as she wrote. Clara's story. Start there. One interview. One step. The act felt small, almost trivial, but it carried a weight she hadn't expected. She set the pen down, her breath uneven. The library fundraiser was tomorrow. She could go, talk to Ruth, maybe ask about Clara's family. It wasn't a book, not yet, but it was a beginning. The doubt still lingered. What if I fail? What if no one cares? But for the first time in years, Maggie felt a pull stronger than fear. She thought of Tesla, of Musk's vision of a world without emissions, a world remade by stubborn belief. Maybe she could remake her own world, too, one story at a time. She stood, her knees still aching but her resolve firmer. She grabbed her coat, an old wool thing that smelled of mothballs, and headed for the door. The library was a mile away, too far to walk with her arthritis, but she'd drive, maybe stop at the diner for a coffee to steel her nerves. As she stepped outside, the cold air hit her face, sharp and alive. The sky was still gray, but a sliver of sunlight broke through, glinting off the frost on her lawn. Maggie took a deep breath, the tape recorder tucked in her pocket, and whispered, "One step." Maggie Thompson gripped the steering wheel of her 1998 Buick, the engine's low hum a familiar comfort as she drove toward the Willow Creek Library. The Ohio air was crisp, the late morning sky a patchwork of clouds breaking apart to reveal slivers of blue. Her tape recorder sat in the passenger seat, nestled in her purse next to the journal with its tentative new entry, Clara's story. Start there. One interview. One step. The words felt like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep, but the weight of them had pushed her out the door, past the doubts that had chained her to her armchair for years. At 68, Maggie was no stranger to fear, but today, fear wasn't winning, not yet. The library came into view, a squat brick building with a sagging roof and a sign out front, Save Our Library Fundraiser, Saturday, 11 a.m. Cars lined the gravel lot, more than Maggie expected for a town as sleepy as Willow Creek. She parked, her knees stiff as she stepped out, the cold biting through her wool coat. The air smelled of wet leaves and the faint tang of coffee from the diner across the street. She hesitated, her hand on the car door, the old questions creeping back. What am I doing here? Who's going to care about an old woman's stories? But then she thought of Elon Musk's voice from that interview, sharp and unyielding, just take the first step, and the rest will follow. She clutched her purse tighter and walked toward the library, each step a small defiance against her own uncertainty. Inside, the library buzzed with more life than Maggie had seen in years. Folding tables lined the walls, covered with bake sale treats, Ruth's famous pecan bars, homemade brownies, a tray of slightly lopsided cupcakes. Kids darted between adults, clutching balloons, while a local band tuned their guitars in the corner. Ruth, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, spotted Maggie and waved her over. "Maggie Thompson, you made it," she called, her voice warm as she handed a paper plate to a customer. "I was starting to think you'd hibernate through this one." Maggie forced a smile, her nerves jangling like loose change. "Couldn't miss it," she said, though her voice wavered. She scanned the room, taking in the familiar faces. Ed from next door, grumbling about the coffee, Mrs. Larson, the retired postmaster, fussing over the donation jar. These were her people, the ones she'd taught, laughed with, lived alongside. Yet standing among them, she felt like an outsider, her dreams too big for this small space. She patted her purse, feeling the outline of the tape recorder. One step, she reminded herself. Ruth pulled her aside, her eyes bright. "We're trying to raise $5,000 to fix the roof and keep the lights on. You should have seen this place in Clara's day, packed every summer with kids reading her stories." Maggie's heart skipped at the mention of Clara, the librarian whose story she'd scribbled about last night. "Clara's daughter, Ellen, is here," Ruth added, nodding toward a woman in her 50s arranging books on a table. "She'd love to talk about her mom, I bet." Maggie's pulse quickened. This was it, her chance to start. She thanked Ruth and approached Ellen, her steps slow, her mouth dry. Ellen looked up, her face kind but tired, lines etched from years of caring for Clara before she passed. "Ellen, hi," Maggie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Maggie Thompson, used to teach at the high school. I'm working on a project, stories about folks like your mom. Could I maybe talk to you about her?" Ellen's eyes softened. Mom would have loved that. She always said this library was her legacy. They sat at a quiet table, the hum of the fundraiser fading as Maggie pulled out her tape recorder. Her hands shook as she pressed record, but Ellen's smile steadied her. For the next hour, Ellen shared stories of Clara, how she'd read to kids during power outages, how she'd sneaked books to shy readers, how she'd fought to keep the library open during lean years. Maggie listened, scribbling notes, her heart swelling with every word. It was like stepping back into her classroom, where stories had power, where they mattered, but when Maggie got home that evening, the spark flickered. She plugged the tape recorder into her laptop, hoping to transcribe Ellen's words, but the screen froze, the ancient machine coughing up error messages. She cursed under her breath, slamming the laptop shut. The recorder's batteries were dead, too, and she didn't have spares. She sank into her armchair, the weight of her 68 years pressing down. This is what happens when you try something new, she thought. It falls apart. The journals on the coffee table mocked her, their pages full of dreams she'd never finished. She imagined Sarah's voice, sharp from their last fight. "You're stuck in the past, Mom." Maybe Sarah was right. Maggie stared at the ceiling, the familiar cracks mapping her doubts. She'd felt alive today, talking to Ellen, hearing Clara's story. But now she felt foolish. The library fundraiser would probably fail, just like her book idea had all those years ago. She was too old for this, too out of touch. She thought of Dr. Patel's warning, "Slow down, Margaret." Maybe he was right, too, but then she remembered the Tesla announcement on the radio, how Musk had pushed through setbacks to build 1,000,000 cars. She opened her laptop again, ignoring the error messages, and searched for him on X. A post caught her eye, something he'd written about failure: "Every setback is just data. Learn from it, keep going." Maggie leaned back, her breath steadying. Her laptop was a setback, not the end. She didn't need it to write Clara's story. She had her journal, her pen, her memory of Ellen's words. She could start there. The next morning, Maggie drove to the electronics store in the next town, her Buick rattling over the potholed roads. The clerk, a kid barely out of high school, raised an eyebrow when she asked for a used laptop. "You sure you don't want something simpler?" he said, pointing to a basic tablet. Maggie's jaw tightened. "I need a real computer," she said, her voice firm. "I'm writing a book." The words felt foreign, bold, but they lit something inside her. She spent $200, more than she'd planned, but walked out with a refurbished laptop, its keys shiny and new. Back home, she set up the laptop on her kitchen table, the journal open beside it. She typed Clara's story from memory, her fingers clumsy but determined. Clara Jenkins turned the Willow Creek Library into a beacon, she wrote, a place where every child felt seen. The sentences were rough, but they were hers. She saved the file, her heart pounding. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a real start. Maggie leaned back, the kitchen quiet except for the tick of the clock. She thought of Musk again, not as a billionaire but as a man who'd failed and kept going. Her laptop crash, her dead batteries, her doubts, they were just data, not defeat. She opened her journal and wrote, "Step 2, keep writing. No matter what." The words felt like a vow, one she wasn't sure she could keep but was determined to try. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across her lawn. Maggie stood, her knees still aching but her steps lighter. She'd go back to the library tomorrow, maybe talk to more people, gather more stories. Clara's was just the beginning. For the first time in years, Maggie felt a pull towards something bigger than her loneliness, a purpose, fragile but real, like the first electric spark in one of Musk's cars. Maggie Thompson sat at her kitchen table, the new laptop humming softly, its screen casting a gentle glow across the room. The Ohio evening was quiet, save for the distant hum of crickets and the occasional creak of her old house settling. Her journal lay open beside her, Clara Jenkins' story now a single typed page, rough, unpolished, but real. The words stared back at her. Clara turned the Willow Creek Library into a beacon, a place where every child felt seen. Maggie's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her arthritis a dull throb, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. At 68, she'd taken a step, small, shaky, but hers, and it felt like the first breath after a long dive underwater. She'd spent the day after the library fundraiser transcribing Ellen's stories, piecing together Clara's life, the librarian who'd read to kids by candlelight during storms, who'd fought budget cuts to keep the library's doors open, who taught a young Maggie to love history through dog-eared books. Writing it had been slow, her fingers clumsy on the unfamiliar keys, but each sentence felt like reclaiming a piece of herself, the Maggie who'd once dreamed of telling the world about small-town heroes. She saved the file, naming it Clara's Beacon, and leaned back, a faint smile tugging at her lips. It wasn't a book, not yet, but it was something. A spark. Maggie opened her browser, almost instinctively, and navigated to X. She'd created an account yesterday, spurred by Ruth's insistence that everyone's online these days. She'd posted a short note about Clara's story, nothing fancy, working on a project about Willow Creek's unsung heroes. Starting with Clara Jenkins, who made our library a home. She hadn't expected much, maybe a like from Ruth, if she was lucky. But when she refreshed the page, her breath caught. 3 people had shared her post. 3 strangers, their names unfamiliar, had commented, "Love this. Tell us more. And Clara sounds amazing. Keep going." Maggie stared, her heart thudding. 3 shares weren't a viral sensation, but to her, they were a miracle, proof that someone, somewhere, cared. She scrolled through X, her curiosity pulling her to Elon Musk's profile. His latest post was about Tesla's mission: every car we build is a step toward a cleaner future. It's not about perfection, it's about progress. Maggie read it twice, the words resonating. She wasn't building cars or saving the planet, but Clara's story felt like her own step toward progress, a way to clear the emissions of her own regrets and self-doubt. Musk's relentless drive, his refusal to stop at good enough, made her small victory feel bigger. If he could keep pushing through failures, maybe she could, too. The next morning, Maggie drove to the Willow Creek Diner, her Buick rattling over the familiar roads. The diner was a time capsule, checkered floors, vinyl booths, the smell of bacon and burnt coffee. She'd come to meet Ruth, who texted about a surprise related to the fundraiser. Maggie's tape recorder was in her purse, along with her journal, just in case another story sparked. She felt nervous but alive, her pulse quick with possibility. The diner was busy, locals chatting over pancakes, and Maggie spotted Ruth in a corner booth, waving her over with a grin. "You're not gonna believe this," Ruth said, sliding a tablet across the table. It was open to a local news site, with a headline, "Willow Creek Woman Revives Local History with Heartfelt Blog Post." Below it was Maggie's ex-post about Clara, alongside a photo of the library fundraiser. The article quoted Ellen, "Maggie's bringing my mom's legacy back to life. It means the world." Maggie's mouth went dry, her hands trembling as she read. The piece ended with a call to support the library and a link to Maggie's post. "It's got over 100 shares already," Ruth said, her eyes twinkling. "You're a celebrity, Maggie." Maggie laughed, a nervous sound. "Hardly. It's just one story." But her chest swelled, a warmth she hadn't felt since her teaching days, when a student's breakthrough would light her up for weeks. She thought of her classroom, how she'd tell her kids, one good deed, one kind word, it ripples. Clara's story was rippling, touching people she'd never met. It wasn't just about Clara, it was about Maggie proving to herself she still had something to give. Ruth leaned forward, her voice soft. You know, Clara would have loved this. She always said you were her favorite teacher, said you had a way of making history feel alive. Maggie's eyes stung, the compliment catching her off guard. She'd forgotten how much Clara's library had shaped her, how those summer reading programs had fueled her own dreams. Writing Clara's story wasn't just a step forward, it was a way to honor the past, to reconnect with the Maggie who'd once believed she could change the world, but the victory was fragile. Back home, Maggie opened her laptop to check her post again. The shares had climbed to 150, with more comments. This is beautiful. And can't wait for the next story. But one comment stopped her cold. Nice, but who's got time for old stories? Move on. The words hit like a slap, echoing her deepest fears. What if this was a fluke? What if people lost interest? She thought of Sarah, her daughter's silence a constant reminder of her failures. If Sarah didn't care, why would strangers? Maggie closed the laptop, her hands shaking. She paced the kitchen, the linoleum cool under her socks. The journal sat open, Clara's story a single page among so many blank ones. She wanted to keep going, to write more, maybe about the farmer who'd saved his neighbors during the '92 flood, or the mechanic who'd fixed cars for free during the recession. But the doubt was back, heavier now, whispering that she was too old, too irrelevant. She sank into her armchair, the familiar creak a comfort and a cage. Then she remembered Musk's words from a Tesla keynote she'd watched online, building the future is about one step at a time. You don't need everyone to believe in you, just enough to keep going. Maggie exhaled, her breath steadying. The negative comment was just noise, like the setbacks Musk faced when critics doubted Tesla's vision. She didn't need everyone to care, just enough. And 150 shares, a local news story, Ellen's gratitude, that was enough for now. She opened the laptop again and typed a new post. Thank you for the love on Clara's story. Next up, stories of Willow Creek's everyday heroes. Who's got one to share? Her finger hovered over the post button, her heart racing. It was a risk, asking for more, opening herself to criticism. But she hit send, the action small but bold, like flipping a switch. Within minutes, a reply came. My grandpa ran the fire station in the '70s. Can I tell you about him? Maggie's eyes widened, a smile breaking through. Another story. Another step. She grabbed her journal and wrote, Step 3, ask for more. Keep the spark alive. The words felt like a vow, one she was starting to believe she could keep. She thought of Tesla's mission, how each car was a piece of a bigger dream, a world without emissions, a future built on persistence. Maggie's dream was smaller, but it was hers. A book, a legacy, a way to prove she wasn't done. She stood, her knees still aching but her spirit lighter, and headed to the kitchen to make tea. Tomorrow, she'd call the person who'd commented about their grandpa. Tomorrow, she'd keep going. Outside, the Ohio night was clear, stars piercing the dark. Maggie stepped onto her porch, the air sharp against her skin. She imagined driving a Tesla, sleek and silent, speeding toward a horizon she couldn't yet see. For now, her old Buick would do, but the feeling was the same. A journey started, a spark ignited, a future within reach. Maggie Thompson sat at her kitchen table, the glow of her new laptop casting shadows across the familiar clutter of her Willow Creek home. The Ohio night was still, the only sound the faint tick of the clock and the occasional creak of the house settling into its old bones. Her journal lay open, a new entry scrawled in her shaky hand, Step 3, ask for more. Keep the spark alive. The words felt bold when she'd written them, buoyed by the small victory of her blog post about Clara Jenkins gaining 150 shares and a mention in the local news. But now, at 68, with the weight of another day pressing down, that spark felt like it was flickering, threatened by a wind she couldn't quite name. She opened her laptop, navigating to X to check her latest post. Thank you for the love on Clara's story. Next up, stories of Willow Creek's everyday heroes. Who's got one to share? The response from a stranger about their grandpa, a former fire chief, had lit a fire in her yesterday. She'd already set up a call with them for tomorrow, her tape recorder ready, her journal brimming with questions. But as she scrolled through the comments, her stomach tightened. Beneath the handful of encouraging replies was a new one, sharp and cold: "Why waste time on old stories? Nobody cares about this town anymore. Move on." Another followed, sweet, but irrelevant: "The world's got bigger problems." Maggie's breath caught, the words slicing through her fragile confidence. She closed the laptop, her hands trembling, and leaned back in her chair. The kitchen smelled of chamomile tea and the faint must of old linoleum, grounding her in a reality that suddenly felt too small. She'd expected some pushback, her neighbor Ed's skeptical squint, Dr. Patel's warnings about her health, but this was different. These were strangers, faceless voices on a platform she barely understood, dismissing her work as pointless. The doubt she'd been holding at bay roared back: what if they're right? What if I'm just a foolish old woman chasing a dream nobody wants? She stood, pacing the kitchen, her slippers scuffing against the floor. The photo of her and Tom on the counter caught her eye, his arm around her, their smiles bright at that long-ago county fair. She could almost hear his voice, warm and steady: "You're gonna make people see the world differently, Maggie." But Tom was gone, and so was Sarah, her daughter, whose silence was a wound that never healed. Maggie thought of their last fight, 3 years ago, Sarah's voice crackling over the phone: "You're stuck in the past, Mom. I can't keep fixing you." The memory stung, sharper now with the sting of those online comments. If her own daughter thought her dreams were a waste, why would the world think differently? Maggie sank into her armchair, the springs groaning under her weight. Her arthritis flared, a dull ache in her fingers, a reminder of Dr. Patel's words: "Slow down, Margaret. You're not 40 anymore." She'd ignored him, driven by the spark of Clara's story and the unexpected ripple it created. But now, with those cruel comments echoing in her mind, she wondered if he was right. Maybe she was pushing too hard, risking her health, her peace, for a project that would fade like Willow Creek itself, a town of empty storefronts and forgotten stories. She glanced at the laptop, tempted to delete her post, to retreat to the safety of her quiet life. But something stopped her, a memory of Elon Musk's voice from a podcast she'd listened to last week, his words clipped and fierce: "Ignore the noise. The critics, the doubters, they're just background static. Keep building what matters." Maggie had saved the quote in her journal, scribbling it beneath Clara's story. She opened the journal now, her fingers tracing the words. Musk wasn't talking about her, not directly, but his defiance felt personal. He'd faced skeptics who called Tesla a pipe dream, who laughed at his electric cars when gas was king. Yet he kept going, building a future one car at a time. If he could ignore the noise, maybe she could, too. Maggie stood, her resolve shaky but stubborn, and opened the laptop again. She typed a reply to the negative comments: "These stories matter to me, and maybe to others. I'm just getting started." Her finger hovered over the post button, her heart pounding. It wasn't a grand rebuttal, but it was honest, a small act of defiance against the voices, online and in her head, that told her to quit. She hit send, her breath uneven, and waited. No replies came, not yet, but the act of responding felt like reclaiming her spark. The next day, Maggie drove to the diner to meet Ruth, who'd insisted on a follow-up to the fundraiser. The air was crisp, the Ohio fields golden with early fall. The diner smelled of bacon and syrup, its booths filled with locals swapping gossip. Ruth waved her over, her smile wide. "You're a star, Maggie. That news article's got people talking. Ellen says her cousins in Dayton saw it." Maggie forced a smile, her confidence dented by last night's comments. She told Ruth about the post, about the fire chief's story, but hesitated before mentioning the negativity. Ruth's eyes narrowed. "You're gonna get naysayers, hon, always do when you stick your neck out. Remember Clara? She got flack for keeping the library open during budget cuts, but she didn't stop." Maggie nodded, the words sinking in. Clara had faced her own noise, town council meetings, budget fights, and kept going. Maybe Maggie could, too, but the real test came later that afternoon, when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah's name, a sight so rare Maggie nearly dropped her mug. Her heart raced as she answered, her voice trembling. "Sarah?" "Mom," Sarah said, her tone clipped but not angry. "I saw your post. The one about Clara." Maggie froze, unsure what to say. Sarah went on, her voice softer now. "It's nice. I didn't know you were doing this. But it's a lot, isn't it? You sure you're up for it?" The question stung, laced with the same doubt Maggie had heard in their last fight. She wanted to snap back, to say she was fine, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she said, "I'm trying, Sarah. It matters to me." There was a long pause, then Sarah sighed. "Okay. Just, don't overdo it. I'll call again soon." The line went dead, leaving Maggie staring at the phone, her emotions a tangle of hope and hurt. Sarah's call was a crack in their estrangement, but her skepticism felt like another comment on X, another voice telling Maggie her efforts were futile. She sat at the kitchen table, the journal open, the laptop glowing. The fire chief's story waited, and she had a call scheduled tomorrow to hear it. But the pushback, online, from Sarah, from her own body, loomed large. She thought of Musk again, his words about noise, about building despite the critics. Tesla's mission wasn't just about cars, it was about believing in a future others couldn't see. Maggie's future was smaller, a book, a legacy, but it was hers. She picked up her pen, her hand steadier now, and wrote, "Step 4, ignore the noise. Write the next story." The words felt like a shield, fragile but enough to keep going. She opened her laptop and started typing the fire chief's story, based on the brief message she'd received. He saved a family from a burning house in '76. The sentences were rough, but they flowed, each one a step away from the doubters, from Sarah's caution, from her own fears. Outside, the Ohio sky darkened, but Maggie didn't notice. She was building something, one word at a time, and for now, that was enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Maggie Thompson woke to the faint glow of dawn seeping through her bedroom curtains, the Ohio air heavy with the promise of rain. At 68, mornings were a battle, her arthritis flared in the damp, her knees protesting as she swung her legs out of bed. But today, something felt different. The journal on her nightstand, its pages filled with notes about Clara Jenkins and the fire chief, seemed to hum with possibility. Last night's call from Sarah, though laced with skepticism, had cracked open a door Maggie hadn't dared hope was still there. The harsh comments on X still stung, why waste time on old stories? But so did Elon Musk's words from that podcast, ignore the noise. Keep building what matters. Maggie was tired of listening to the noise. Today, she'd make a choice, a bold one. She shuffled to the kitchen, the linoleum cool under her slippers, and brewed coffee, the drip of the machine a steady rhythm against the quiet. The laptop sat on the table, its screen dark but waiting. Beside it was her tape recorder, charged and ready for her call with Tom Bradley, the grandson of the fire chief who'd saved a family in '76. Maggie had spent yesterday outlining his story, her handwriting cramped but eager. Chief Bradley ran into a burning house, carried a child to safety, never asked for praise. It was the kind of story she dreamed of telling decades ago, when her book idea was young and her heart was fearless. Now, at 68, she felt that fearlessness stirring again, fragile but real. Maggie opened her journal, flipping past Clara's story to a new page. She wrote, "Step 5, tell their stories. Build the book." The word book felt audacious, almost reckless, but it was the truth of what she wanted, not just a blog, not just scattered posts on X, but a real book, a collection of Willow Creek's unsung heroes. Clara, the fire chief, the farmer from the '92 flood, she'd weave their stories together, a tapestry of small-town strength. The idea had lived in her for decades, buried under years of teaching, raising Sarah, and losing Tom. But now, inspired by Musk's relentless push for Tesla's vision, a world remade, one car at a time, she felt ready to unearth it. The call with Tom Bradley was at 10 a.m., and Maggie spent the morning preparing, her nerves buzzing like the static on her old radio. She tested the tape recorder, scribbled questions in her journal. What did your grandfather feel that night? Why did he keep serving? She thought of Musk again, not his cars or rockets, but his mindset, his refusal to let doubt stop him. She'd watched a podcast clip last night, Musk talking about Tesla's early days. We were bleeding cash, everyone said we'd fail, but you don't build the future by playing it safe. Maggie wasn't building a company, but she was building something, a legacy, a purpose. She'd play it bold. The call went better than she'd hoped. Tom, a gruff man in his 40s, spoke with pride about his grandfather, sharing details Maggie hadn't expected, how Chief Bradley had trained volunteers after the fire, how he'd mentored young firefighters, how he'd never bragged about his heroism. He'd have liked you writing this, Tom said, his voice thick. He always said the real heroes don't get statues. Maggie hung up, her heart full, and spent the afternoon typing his story, her fingers slow but determined. Chief Bradley ran toward danger when others ran away, she wrote, the words flowing easier now. She posted a snippet on X, meet Chief Bradley, Willow Creek's quiet hero of '76. More to come. Within hours, it had 50 shares, comments flooding in, this is why small towns matter. And keep these stories coming, but boldness came with a cost. That evening, Maggie's phone buzzed with another call from Sarah. She answered, her stomach nodding. Mom, I saw your new post, Sarah said, her tone cautious. You're really doing this, aren't you? Writing about all these people. Maggie braced herself, expecting criticism, but Sarah's voice softened. It's cool, I guess. But it's a lot of work. Are you sure you're okay? You know, with your health. Maggie's jaw tightened. Sarah's concern felt like a shadow of Dr. Patel's warnings, a reminder of her age, her limits. I'm fine, Sarah, she said, sharper than she meant. This matters to me. I'm not just sitting around waiting to. She stopped, the word die caught in her throat. Sarah sighed, a sound Maggie knew too well. Okay, Mom. Just, be careful. I'll call soon. The line went dead, leaving Maggie staring at the phone, her victory tainted by the same old hurt. Sarah's doubt wasn't cruel, but it felt like another comment on X, another voice questioning her place in a world that valued youth and speed. She stood, pacing the kitchen, the air thick with the smell of rain and burnt toast. The journal lay open, Chief Bradley's story half-written, but doubt crept in, cold and heavy. What if Sarah was right? What if this book was too much, too late? Her heart raced, a flutter she hadn't felt since Dr. Patel's last checkup. She thought of his words. Slow down, Margaret. Stress isn't good for you. She sank into her armchair, the familiar creak a comfort and a cage. The laptop glowed, X open to her post, the positive comments outnumbered by a few new negatives, another old story. Boring, and this town's dead. Why bother? Maggie closed her eyes, her breath uneven. She felt caught between two worlds, the one pulling her forward, fueled by Clara's story, Tom's voice, and Musk's defiance, and the one holding her back, heavy with Sarah's caution, her own body, and the faceless critics online. She thought of Tesla, how Musk had pushed through years of doubt to build 1 million cars, each one a step toward a cleaner future. Her book was her own kind of clean future, a life free of regret, a legacy that said she was here, she mattered. But it required a choice, a bold one, to keep going despite the noise. She opened her laptop and searched for Musk again, landing on a clip from a Tesla keynote, the future isn't built by the timid. You have to bet on yourself, even when nobody else does. Maggie let the words sink in, her resolve hardening. She wasn't timid, not today. She opened a new document and titled it Small Town Heroes, her heart pounding as she typed the first line. Willow Creek is a place of quiet courage, where ordinary people do extraordinary things. It was a manifesto, a declaration that she'd write this book, no matter the doubters, no matter her age. The next day, Maggie drove to the library, her Buick rattling through the rain-slicked streets. She'd called Ruth, asking to meet more locals who might share stories. The library was quieter now, the fundraiser over, but Ruth had gathered a small group: Ellen, Tom Bradley, and a woman named June, whose father had been the farmer in the '92 flood. Maggie sat with them, her tape recorder humming, her journal open. Their stories poured out, June's father hauling neighbors to safety in his tractor, Ellen's memories of Clara teaching her to read, Tom's pride in his grandfather's legacy. Maggie listened, her pen flying, her heart full. These weren't just stories, they were proof that Willow Creek, and Maggie, still had something to say. She spent the evening typing, her fingers aching but her spirit alive. She posted another update on X, writing a book about Willow Creek's heroes. Next up, the farmer who saved lives in '92. Share your stories. The post gained traction, more shares than before, but Maggie didn't check the comments. She'd made her choice. To build, to write, to bet on herself. She thought of Musk's Tesla, each car a defiance of the status quo. Her book was her defiance, her way of driving toward a future where she wasn't invisible, where her stories lit up the dark. Outside, the rain fell softly, washing the Ohio fields clean. Maggie stood at her window, the journal in her hands, and whispered, "I'm not done." The words were a vow, bold and unbreakable, carrying her toward a horizon she was just beginning to see. Maggie Thompson sat in the Willow Creek Library, the scent of old books and damp wood mingling with the faint sweetness of Ruth's pecan bars, set out on a table for the small group gathered around her. The Ohio rain pattered against the windows, a soft drumbeat underscoring the voices of Ellen, Tom Bradley, and June, who shared stories of their loved ones, Clara the librarian, Chief Bradley the fire chief, and June's farmer father who'd braved the '92 flood. Maggie's tape recorder whirred, capturing every word, while her journal filled with notes, her handwriting cramped but eager. At 68, she felt a spark she hadn't known in years, fueled by her bold choice to write a book, Small Town Heroes, and by the faint echo of Elon Musk's words, bet on yourself, even when nobody else does. The library was quieter than it had been during the fundraiser, its shelves a testament to Clara's legacy, though the roof still leaked into a bucket by the children's section. Maggie's laptop sat open, her latest X post glowing on the screen, writing a book about Willow Creek's heroes. Next up, the farmer who saved lives in '92. Share your stories. The post had gained 200 shares, more than she'd dreamed, with comments pouring in. My aunt was a nurse here in the '80s, can I tell you about her? And this is what our town needs. Maggie's heart swelled, but the memory of the negative comments, why bother? Lingered, a shadow she was learning to ignore. Ruth, ever the organizer, had rallied this group to help Maggie's project, and now they sat in a circle, their faces lit with a mix of pride and nostalgia. You're doing something special, Maggie, Ellen said, her voice soft. Mom would have been so proud. Tom nodded, his gruff demeanor softening. Grandpa never wanted fame, but he'd want his story told right. You're doing that. June, a wiry woman with calloused hands, added, my dad would have said you're keeping Willow Creek alive. Maggie's throat tightened, their words a balm against the doubts that had plagued her. Sarah's skepticism, the harsh comments, her own fears of being too old. She thought of Musk's Tesla keynote, his insistence that progress came from persistence, not perfection. Her book wasn't perfect, but it was growing, each story a brick in a foundation she hadn't dared build until now. Thank you, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion welling in her chest. I want this book to show what makes this town special. You're helping me do that. As the meeting ended, a young woman approached, her ponytail bouncing as she clutched a tablet. Mrs. Thompson. I'm Lily, the new librarian. I saw your post on X, and I think I can help. Lily's eyes sparkled with an energy Maggie envied, reminding her of her teaching days. I've been digitizing the library's archives, old newspapers, photos, oral histories. If you're writing about Willow Creek's heroes, I can pull records to back up your stories. Maybe even set up a website for your project. Maggie blinked, caught off guard. A website? She barely understood X, let alone digital archives. Her arthritis made typing a chore, and technology felt like a foreign language. But Lily's enthusiasm was infectious, and Maggie thought of Musk again, how he'd embraced tech to build Tesla's future, turning skeptics into believers. That'd be amazing, Maggie said, her voice tentative. I'm not great with computers, though. Lily grinned. I'll teach you. It's not as hard as it looks. We could make a page for each hero, with photos and your stories. It'd reach more people than a book alone. Maggie's heart raced, a mix of excitement and fear. A website sounded big, modern, far beyond her small-town dreams. But wasn't that what Musk did, dreamed bigger than anyone thought possible? She nodded, a smile breaking through. Let's do it. The next few days were a whirlwind. Maggie met Lily at the library daily, learning to navigate a basic website builder. Her fingers fumbled on the keyboard, her eyes straining at the screen, but Lily was patient, guiding her through uploading Clara's story and a grainy photo of the librarian from 1975, her smile wide as she read to a group of kids. Maggie typed a caption, Clara Jenkins, Willow Creek's Heart, 1940 to 2010. The page looked simple, but to Maggie, it was a marvel, a digital monument to a woman who'd shaped her town. When Lily linked it to X, the shares climbed to 300, with comments from as far as Cleveland, "This is beautiful. More, please." The community's response grew beyond the library. At the diner, locals stopped Maggie to share stories, the mechanic who'd fixed cars for free during the recession, the teacher who'd tutored kids after hours. Maggie recorded each one, her tape recorder a constant companion, her journal filling with names and dates. Ruth spread the word, and soon Maggie had a list of a dozen people to interview. The project was no longer just hers, it was Willow Creek's, a collective act of remembering what made their town matter, but the weight of it pressed on her. Each night, Maggie collapsed into her armchair, her body aching, her mind racing. She thought of Dr. Patel's warnings about her blood pressure, of Sarah's cautious voice, "Are you sure you're up for it?" The website, the interviews, the book, it was more than she'd done in years, and her body felt the strain. One evening, as she typed another story, her vision blurred, a sharp pain shooting through her chest. She froze, her breath shallow, and sat back, clutching the armrest. Not now, she thought, panic rising. She took slow breaths, the pain easing, but the fear lingered. Was she pushing too hard? She opened her laptop, almost instinctively, and searched for Musk. A recent X post caught her eye, "Problems are just puzzles. Solve them one piece at a time." Maggie exhaled, the words grounding her. Her health was a puzzle, not a verdict. She'd call Dr. Patel tomorrow, maybe adjust her meds, but she wouldn't stop. The community's response, Lily's help, the diner conversations, the shares on X, was proof her work mattered. She wasn't just writing a book, she was building a bridge between Willow Creek's past and its future, just as Tesla bridged old energy to new. The next day, Maggie met Lily at the library, her resolve renewed. They uploaded Chief Bradley's story, pairing it with a faded photo of him in his fireman's gear. The website now had 3 pages, Clara, Bradley, and a placeholder for June's father. Lily showed Maggie how to track visitors, over 500 in a week, from Ohio to California. "You're going viral, Mrs. Thompson," Lily said, grinning. Maggie laughed, the sound foreign but welcome. Viral or not, she felt seen, her spark now a steady flame. That evening, Maggie sat at her kitchen table, the rain outside a soft lullaby. She opened her journal and wrote, "Step 6, build with others. Let the community carry you. She thought of Sarah, the crack in their silence still fragile but real. She typed a new X post, Willow Creek's heroes are coming to life, thanks to you. Who's next? The shares kept climbing, the comments mostly kind. Maggie smiled, her fingers aching but her heart full. She was driving toward her own zero-emission future. Not cars, but a life free of regret, fueled by stories and a community that believed in her. Outside, the Ohio rain slowed, the clouds parting to reveal a sliver of moon. Maggie stood at her window, the journal in her hands, and whispered, "This is just the beginning." The words were a promise, one she was starting to believe she could keep. Maggie Thompson sat at her kitchen table, the faint glow of her laptop casting long shadows across the familiar clutter of her Willow Creek home. The Ohio night was quiet, the rain from earlier in the week replaced by a crisp stillness, the air carrying the earthy scent of autumn fields. Her journal lay open, filled with notes from her interviews, Clara Jenkins, Chief Bradley, June's father, and a new entry in her shaky hand, Step 6, build with others. Let the community carry you. The words felt like a lifeline, tethering her to the growing support of her town, to the website Lily was helping her build, to the dream of small-town heroes taking shape. At 68, Maggie felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, but the weight of her past, her regrets, her losses, her estrangement from Sarah, was never far behind. She opened her laptop, navigating to the website Lily had set up. 3 pages glowed on the screen, Clara's story with her 1975 photo, Chief Bradley's with his fireman's gear, and a draft for June's father, the farmer who'd saved lives in the '92 flood. The site had over 700 visitors now, with comments flooding in on X, "These stories are why I love small towns. And can't wait for the book." Maggie's heart swelled, but a flicker of doubt lingered. The negative comments, "Why bother?" still echoed, and Sarah's cautious call last week, "Are you sure you're up for it?" felt like a warning she couldn't shake. Her arthritis ached, and that chest pain from a few nights ago, though brief, had scared her. Was she strong enough for this? Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. An X notification. She opened it, expecting another comment on her latest post about June's father. Instead, it was a direct message from a familiar name, Sarah Thompson. Maggie's breath caught, her fingers trembling as she clicked. "Mom, I read your website. Clara's story, it reminded me of the library days with you. I didn't know you were doing all this. Can we talk?" The words hit like a wave, a mix of hope and hurt. Sarah, her estranged daughter, had seen her work. Not just seen it, felt something. Maggie stared at the message, her heart pounding. It was the first real crack in their 3-year silence, but it came with a weight she wasn't sure she could carry. She stood, pacing the kitchen, the linoleum cool under her socks. The photo of her and Tom on the counter caught her eye, Niagara Falls, 20 years ago, their smiles bright with possibility. Sarah had been 10 then, tagging along, her laughter filling the gaps in Maggie's dreams. Those were the years before the fights, before Tom's cancer, before Sarah pulled away, blaming Maggie for clinging too tightly to grief. Maggie had buried her book idea back then, telling herself there'd be time later, after Sarah's school plays, after Tom's treatments. Now, with Sarah reaching out, the past resurfaced, raw and unfiltered. What did she want? To reconnect, or to caution Maggie again? Maggie sat back down, her hands unsteady as she typed a reply, "I'd love to talk, Sarah. I'm home tomorrow evening. Call me." She hit send, her chest tight, and closed the laptop. The journal stared back at her, its pages a map of her rediscovery, but also a reminder of what she'd lost. Writing small-town heroes wasn't just about Willow Creek, it was about reclaiming the Maggie who dreamed big, who believed she could matter. But Sarah's message stirred up old wounds, the fights, the silence, the fear that her daughter saw her as a relic, stuck in the past. She thought of Elon Musk, whose words had sparked this journey. She'd watched another Tesla keynote last night, Musk's voice steady as he talked about setbacks. Every failure is a lesson. You don't stop, you learn, you adapt, you keep going. Maggie's failures weren't corporate, but they were real: her abandoned book, her broken bond with Sarah, her own doubts about being too old. Writing was her way of adapting, of shedding the emissions of regret and fear, just as Tesla aimed to clear the air of fossil fuels. Sarah's message was a lesson, not a verdict. Maybe it was a chance to rebuild, not just her book, but her family. The next evening, Maggie waited by the phone, her kitchen bathed in the warm glow of a single lamp. The rain had returned, a soft patter against the windows, and she sipped chamomile tea, trying to calm her nerves. When the phone rang, she answered on the first ring. Sarah? Hi, Mom, Sarah said, her voice softer than Maggie expected. I didn't know you were writing again. The website, the stories, it's really something. Maggie's throat tightened, the praise unexpected. I saw Clara's picture, Sarah went on. I remember her reading to me. You used to take me to the library every Saturday. I'd forgotten that. Maggie's eyes stung, memories flooding back. Sarah, small and curious, curled up with a book while Clara whispered stories. You loved those days, Maggie said, her voice thick. I thought you'd forgotten, too. I didn't forget, Sarah said, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. It's just, life got in the way. Work, everything. There was a pause, then Sarah's voice softened again. Your stories, they're good, Mom. But are you sure you're okay? This is a lot, and you're not. She trailed off, but Maggie heard the unspoken. Not young, not healthy. I'm managing, Maggie said, her tone firmer than she felt. This matters to me, Sarah. It's not just about the stories, it's about proving I'm still here. The words came out raw, a truth she hadn't meant to share. Sarah was quiet, and Maggie braced for another caution, another reminder of her limits. Instead, Sarah said, I get it. I worry. I'll call again soon, okay? The call ended, leaving Maggie staring at the phone, her emotions a tangle of hope and frustration. Sarah's words were a step forward, but they carried the same doubt Maggie fought daily: her age, her health, her place in a world that moved too fast. She opened her laptop, needing an anchor. The website showed 800 visitors now, with new comments on X. My dad was a bus driver here in the 60s, can you include him? Maggie smiled, the community's support a counterweight to Sarah's caution. She thought of Musk again, his relentless drive to build Tesla despite skeptics. Her book, her website, they were her Tesla, her way of driving toward a future where she wasn't defined by loss or age. The next day, Maggie met Lily at the library, the air sharp with the smell of wet books and coffee. Lily showed her how to add a contact form to the website, making it easier for people to share stories. You're building something big, Mrs. Thompson, Lily said, her ponytail bouncing as she typed. This could be Willow Creek's legacy. Maggie nodded, her heart swelling. She spent the afternoon interviewing a woman about her bus driver father, her tape recorder capturing every word. Each story felt like a piece of herself reclaimed, a step away from the Maggie who'd felt invisible. But that evening, as she typed in her kitchen, the chest pain returned, a sharp jab, gone in seconds but enough to make her pause. She sat back, her breath shallow, and thought of Dr. Patel's warnings. She'd call him tomorrow, get checked, but she wouldn't stop. Musk's words echoed. You don't stop, you adapt. She'd adapt, pace herself, ask Lily for more help, keep going. Her book was no longer just a dream, it was a mission, fueled by Willow Creek stories and her own stubborn heart. Maggie opened her journal and wrote, Step 7, face the past, keep building the future. She thought of Sarah, of the crack in their silence, and of Tesla's mission to clear the air. Her own mission was clearer now, to write a book that honored her town and herself, to drive toward a life free of regret. Outside, the Ohio rain fell softly, washing the world clean. Maggie stood at her window, the journal in her hands, and whispered, I'm still here. Maggie Thompson sat in her kitchen, the Ohio night heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and the faint lavender of her dish soap. The glow of her laptop illuminated the table, cluttered with her journal, a half-empty mug of chamomile tea, and the tape recorder that had become her constant companion. At 68, Maggie felt the weight of her bold choice to write Small-Town Heroes, a book weaving together Willow Creek's unsung stories, Clara Jenkins, Chief Bradley, June's father. The website Lily had helped her build now had over 800 visitors, and her ex-posts were gaining traction, with comments from strangers as far as California. Sarah's recent message, a hesitant olive branch after 3 years of silence, had sparked hope. But tonight, that hope felt like a candle flickering in a storm. Maggie's fingers ached as she typed, her arthritis flaring in the damp air. She was working on the story of Mr. Hayes, the bus driver from the 60s who'd driven kids to school through blizzards, never missing a day. The words flowed, each sentence a tribute to Willow Creek's quiet strength, but her body was fighting her. A sharp pain stabbed her chest, the same jolt she'd felt a few nights ago, quick but sharp enough to make her gasp. She sat back, clutching the edge of the table, her breath shallow. The pain faded, but fear took its place, cold and heavy. Not now, she thought, her heart racing. Not when I'm so close, she thought of Dr. Patel's warnings, his calm voice echoing. Slow down, Margaret. Stress isn't good for your heart. She'd meant to call him, to schedule a checkup, but the interviews, the website, the stories, they'd consumed her. She thought of Sarah's cautious words, "Are you sure you're up for it?" The doubt in her daughter's voice, the negative comments on X, why bother with old stories? And now her own body seemed to conspire against her. Maggie closed her eyes, the kitchen's silence pressing in, broken only by the tick of the clock and the distant patter of rain. Was this her breaking point? Had she pushed too far, too fast, at an age when the world expected her to rest? She stood, her knees protesting, and shuffled to the counter, where the photo of her and Tom smiled back, Niagara Falls, 20 years ago, a time when dreams felt possible. She'd buried her book idea then, telling herself there'd be time after Tom's illness, after Sarah grew up. Now, with Tom gone and Sarah distant, the book was her lifeline, her way to prove she wasn't invisible. But what if her body gave out before she could finish? What if the stories, Clara's, Bradley's, Hayes, died with her, unwritten, unread? Maggie's gaze drifted to her laptop, still open to the website. The page for Mr. Hayes was half done, a grainy photo Lily had found in the archives showing him at the wheel of his bus, his smile steady. The site had become a beacon, just like Clara's library, drawing stories from Willow Creek's heart. Maggie thought of Lily's enthusiasm, Ruth's encouragement, the strangers on X who'd shared their own heroes. She wasn't alone in this, not anymore. But the chest pain lingered in her memory, a warning she couldn't ignore. She opened X, almost instinctively, and searched for Elon Musk, needing his defiance to anchor her. A recent post caught her eye, tied to a Tesla ad, "Keep going for the bigger picture. Sustainability isn't just about today, it's about tomorrow." Maggie read it twice, her breath steadying. Her book was her bigger picture, a legacy for Willow Creek, for Sarah, for herself. The pain in her chest was a setback, not a stop sign. Musk had faced his own crises, Tesla's near bankruptcy, critics calling his dreams impossible, but he'd kept going, building a future one car at a time. Maggie could do the same, one story at a time. The next morning, Maggie called Dr. Patel's office, her voice steady as she booked an appointment for the following day. She'd faced the puzzle of her health, just as Musk faced Tesla's challenges. For now, she drove to the library, her Buick rattling through the rain-slicked streets. The air smelled of wet leaves and possibility, and Maggie clung to that as she met Lily, who was uploading Hayes' story to the website. "You're killing it, Mrs. Thompson," Lily said, her ponytail bouncing. "We've got 900 visitors now. People are emailing about their relatives, look." She showed Maggie a list of names, new stories waiting to be told. Maggie smiled, but her chest felt tight, not with pain but with the weight of it all. It's a lot, she admitted, her voice low. Lily's eyes softened. You don't have to do it all alone. I can help with the typing, the uploads. We're a team. Maggie nodded, gratitude warming her. She thought of Musk again, how Tesla wasn't just him but a team, a community working toward a cleaner future. Her book was her team's work now, Lily, Ruth, Ellen, Tom, June. She wasn't carrying it alone. That afternoon, Maggie interviewed a woman about her mother, a nurse who'd worked nights at the county hospital in the 80s. The tape recorder hummed, capturing stories of midnight emergencies and quiet kindnesses. Maggie's pen flew, her journal filling, but her energy waned, her hands trembling. She drove home, the rain heavier now, and collapsed into her armchair, the familiar creak a comfort. The chest pain hadn't returned, but the fear had, whispering that she was too old, too frail, for this dream. She opened her laptop, needing a spark. An email from Lily waited, a link to the updated website, now with Hayes' story live. Maggie clicked, her heart lifting at the sight of his page, complete with a quote from her draft. Mr. Hayes drove through storms to keep kids safe, a hero behind the wheel. Comments poured in on X, my dad rode that bus. Thank you, and this is Willow Creek's soul. But one stood out, a new message from Sarah, Mom, the bus driver story is amazing. I didn't know. Keep going, okay? But take care of yourself. Maggie's eyes stung, Sarah's words a mix of pride and worry. It was more than she'd gotten in years, a sign that her daughter was watching, maybe even believing. But the plea to take care echoed Dr. Patel, stirring Maggie's fear. She thought of her journals, decades old, filled with dreams she'd let die. If she stopped now, they'd stay buried, her legacy lost. She thought of Tesla's mission, how Musk pushed for a world without emissions, a future others couldn't see. Her book was her future, a world where her stories, and Willow Creek's, lived on. Maggie stood, her resolve hardening. She'd see Dr. Patel, pace herself, ask Lily for more help. She opened her journal and wrote, Step 8, face the fear, keep writing. The words were a vow, a promise to herself and to Sarah. She typed a reply to Sarah's message, I'm okay, sweetheart. This is for us, too. Call soon. She hit send, her heart pounding, then returned to Hayes' story, adding a new line. His courage wasn't loud, but it carried a town. Outside, the Ohio rain slowed, the clouds parting to reveal a faint star. Maggie stood at her window, the journal in her hands, and whispered, I won't stop. The words felt fragile, but they were enough. Her book, her stories, her fight, they were her Tesla, driving her toward a future free of regret, one painful, beautiful step at a time. Maggie Thompson sat in the waiting room of Dr. Patel's office, the antiseptic smell mingling with the faint mint of her breath mints, a nervous habit she'd picked up since the chest pain started. The Ohio morning was gray, the rain from the past week lingering in puddles outside, reflecting the fluorescent lights of the clinic. At 68, Maggie felt the weight of her body's betrayal, her arthritis, her heart, the fatigue that clung to her like damp clothes. But her journal, tucked in her purse beside her tape recorder, held a new entry, Step 8, face the fear, keep writing. She'd made a vow last night, spurred by Sarah's message and the growing support for her book, Small Town Heroes. The website Lily had built was nearing 1,000 visitors, her ex-posts buzzing with comments about Clara, Chief Bradley, and Mr. Hayes. Yet the fear of her health failing, of her dream dying unfinished, loomed large. Dr. Patel called her in, his kind eyes scanning her chart. Margaret, your blood pressure's up, and these chest pains worry me, he said, his voice steady but firm. We'll run an EKG, adjust your meds. You need to manage stress, less strain, more rest. Maggie nodded, her throat tight. She'd expected this, but hearing it felt like a verdict. I'm writing a book, she said, almost defiantly. It's important. I can't stop now. Dr. Patel's smile was gentle but unyielding. You can write, but pace yourself. Your heart's not as young as your spirit. She left the clinic with a new prescription and a warning to slow down, her resolve shaken but intact. Driving home, her Buick rattling through Willow Creek's quiet streets, she thought of Elon Musk's words from that Tesla ad, "Keep going for the bigger picture." Her book was her bigger picture, a legacy for her town, for Sarah, for herself. The chest pains, the doctor's warnings, they were obstacles, not endings. Musk had faced his own, Tesla's near failures, critics who called his dreams absurd, but he'd pushed through, building a future one car at a time. Maggie would do the same, one story at a time. Back home, she opened her laptop, the kitchen warm with the smell of coffee and old wood. An email from Lily waited, websites at 1,200 visitors. Check X, your last post went viral. Maggie's heart skipped, not with pain but with a thrill she hadn't felt since her teaching days. She opened X, her latest post about Mr. Hayes' bus driver heroics now at 500 shares. Comments flooded in, "This is my hometown's heart," and, "Mrs. Thompson, you're inspiring us." Then, a notification that stopped her cold, a local news outlet had shared her website, with a headline, "Willow Creek Woman's Stories Spark National Interest." The article quoted Lily, Ellen, and Tom Bradley, praising Maggie's work. It ended with a call to support the library and a link to her site. Maggie's eyes stung, her hands trembling as she clicked the link. The website glowed, Clara's page with her 1975 photo, Chief Bradley's fireman's gear, Mr. Hayes at his bus wheel, and a new draft for June's father. Visitors had left messages. "My grandma was a teacher in Willow Creek, can you include her?" The numbers were small compared to the world's noise, but to Maggie, they were a tidal wave. Her stories, her town, her dream, they were reaching beyond Ohio, touching hearts she'd never met. She thought of Musk's Tesla, each car a step toward a cleaner world. Her book was her clean world, free of the emissions, of regret and invisibility. The phone rang, shattering her reverie. It was Sarah, her voice hesitant but warm. "Mom, I saw the news article. Your website, it's incredible. I didn't realize how big this was." Maggie's throat tightened, Sarah's pride a rare gift. "I showed it to my coworkers," Sarah went on. "They loved the bus driver story. I told them it's my mom doing this." Maggie's eyes welled up, the words hitting deeper than any comment. Sarah paused, then added, "I'm coming to visit this weekend. I want to see you, talk about this." "Okay." Maggie could barely speak. "Okay," she whispered, tears spilling over. "I'd love that." The call ended, and Maggie sat, her hands shaking, her heart full. She and Sarah hadn't seen each other in 3 years, their last fight a wall of hurt, Sarah's anger, Maggie's grief over Tom. This visit wasn't a fix, but it was a start, a crack in the silence wider than any before. Maggie thought of the library days Sarah had mentioned, the Saturdays they'd spent with Clara, reading and laughing. Her book had brought those memories back, not just for her but for Sarah, too. She stood, pacing the kitchen, the linoleum cool under her socks. The photo of her and Tom on the counter smiled back, Niagara Falls, a lifetime ago. Maggie touched it, her fingers tracing Tom's face. "You were right," she whispered. "I'm making people see." Her book wasn't just about Willow Creek's heroes, it was about her own courage, her refusal to fade. The chest pains, Dr. Patel's warnings, they hadn't stopped her. She'd faced her breaking point and kept going, just as Musk had with Tesla's darkest days. Maggie returned to her laptop, opening the website. She added a new page for the nurse from the 80s, typing a line from her interview. She worked nights to save lives, her kindness a light in the dark. The words felt like a mirror, Maggie's own light, flickering but growing. She posted an update on X, "Small Town Heroes is growing, thanks to you." Next, a nurse who lit up Willow Creek. "Share your stories." The shares climbed, the comments kind, but Maggie's focus was on Sarah's visit, on the stories piling up, on the book taking shape. That evening, Maggie met Lily at the library, the air sharp with the smell of old books and rain. Lily showed her the website's analytics. 1,500 visitors, with emails from across the country. "You're a movement, Mrs. Thompson," Lily said, her eyes bright. Maggie laughed, the sound lighter than she'd felt in years. She thought of Musk's keynote, his voice fierce, "The future is built by those who act." She was acting, writing, building, not just a book, but a bridge to Sarah, to her town, to herself. When Sarah arrived that weekend, Maggie's kitchen felt alive again, filled with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of their voices. Sarah hugged her, tentative at first, then fierce, and they sat at the table, the laptop open to the website. "This is you, Mom," Sarah said, scrolling through Clara's page. "You're doing what you always wanted." Maggie's eyes welled up, and she reached for Sarah's hand. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered. Sarah squeezed back, her own eyes wet. "You didn't. I'm here." They talked for hours, about Tom, about the library, about the stories Maggie was writing. Sarah shared memories of Clara, of Willow Creek, and for the first time in years, Maggie felt whole, not fixed, but healing. The chest pains hadn't returned, and though Dr. Patel's warnings lingered, Maggie knew she'd pace herself, lean on Lily, keep going. Her book was her Tesla, driving her toward a future free of regret, powered by love and stories. Outside, the Ohio sky cleared, stars piercing the dark. Maggie stood at her window, Sarah beside her, the journal in her hands. She wrote, "Step 9, Break Through. Build the future with love." The words were a vow, a light in her heart, carrying her toward a horizon she could finally see. Maggie Thompson stood in her kitchen, the Ohio morning bright with a rare autumn sun that streamed through the lace curtains, warming the linoleum floor. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the faint must of her old house, a comforting blend that grounded her as she prepared for the day. At 68, Maggie felt a vitality she hadn't known in years, fueled by the breakthrough of Sarah's visit last weekend and the viral spread of her website, Small Town Heroes. The journal on her kitchen table held a new entry, Step 9, Break Through. Build the future with love. Beside it, her laptop glowed with the website Lily had helped build, now boasting 2,000 visitors and stories of Clara Jenkins, Chief Bradley, Mr. Hayes, and June's father. Maggie's book was no longer a dream, it was real, taking shape with every story she wrote, every comment on X, every memory shared by her town. Sarah's visit had been a turning point. For the first time in 3 years, they'd talked, really talked, about Tom, about the library, about the stories Maggie was weaving into Small Town Heroes. Sarah's hug, fierce and tearful, had cracked open the wall of their estrangement, and her words, "This is you, Mom. You're doing what you always wanted," echoed in Maggie's heart. The chest pains that had scared her, the warnings from Dr. Patel about her blood pressure, still lingered as a caution, but Maggie felt stronger, buoyed by her daughter's pride and the community's support. She thought of Elon Musk's words from that Tesla keynote, "The future is built by those who act." She was acting, writing, building a legacy, not just for Willow Creek, but for herself and Sarah. Maggie opened her laptop, checking the website. A new page for the nurse from the 80s was live, her story of midnight emergencies and quiet kindnesses paired with a faded photo Lily had found in the archives. Comments flooded X, "My mom was a patient of hers, thank you for this," and "Keep telling our stories." The site had become a digital campfire, drawing Willow Creek's past into the present, and Maggie felt like its keeper. She'd self-published the first draft of Small Town Heroes last night, a slim collection of 5 stories, uploaded to a print-on-demand site Lily had shown her. She'd dedicated it to Tom and Sarah, her hands trembling as she typed, "For my anchors, who kept me dreaming." The book wasn't finished, but it was real, a tangible step toward the future she'd once abandoned. A knock at the door startled her. It was Ruth, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, holding a flyer. "Maggie, you've got to see this," she said, her grin wide. The flyer announced a community storytelling event at the library, organized by Ruth and Lily to celebrate Maggie's project. "We're calling it Willow Creek's Heroes Night," Ruth said. "People want to share their stories, read from your book. You're the guest of honor." Maggie's heart raced, a mix of pride and nerves. "Me? I'm just writing what they tell me." Ruth laughed, squeezing her arm. "You're more than that. You're giving us our history back." Maggie clutched the flyer, the words blurring as her eyes stung. She thought of her younger self, the 20-something who'd dreamed of this book, and of Tom's voice. "You're gonna make people see the world differently, Maggie." She was doing it, not just for herself, but for her town, for Sarah, for the Maggie she'd thought was lost. The storytelling event was set for next week, and Maggie spent the days preparing, her kitchen a whirlwind of notes and nerves. She worked with Lily to polish the website, adding a form for people to submit stories directly. Emails poured in, grandchildren of factory workers, daughters of teachers, sons of volunteers, all wanting their loved ones included. Maggie's tape recorder hummed with new interviews, her journal filling with names: the grocer who'd fed families during the Depression, the coach who'd mentored kids through tough times. Each story felt like a brick in her legacy, a way to prove she wasn't too old to matter, but the strain was real. Her arthritis flared, her fingers stiff as she typed, and Dr. Patel's warning echoed, "Pace yourself." She'd started her new meds, but the chest pains hadn't returned, giving her cautious hope. She leaned on Lily more, letting her handle website updates, and asked Ruth to organize interview schedules. It was a lesson from Musk's Tesla journey, gleaned from a podcast she'd heard: no one builds alone. Surround yourself with people who believe in the mission. Maggie's mission was her book, and Willow Creek was her team. The night of the event arrived, the library transformed with string lights and folding chairs, the air thick with the smell of coffee and fresh-baked cookies. Over 50 people filled the room, locals Maggie had taught, neighbors she'd known for decades, strangers drawn by the news article. Sarah was there, too, sitting in the front row, her smile tentative but real. Maggie's heart swelled, her nerves fading as she took the podium, her journal and a printed copy of Small-Town Heroes in hand. "Thank you for coming," Maggie said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "These stories, Clara's, Bradley's, Hayes, they're not just mine. They're ours. They're Willow Creek." She read from her book, her words carrying Clara's candlelit readings, Bradley's firelit courage, Hayes' snowy bus routes. The room was silent, then erupted in applause, faces wet with tears and pride. Sarah's eyes shone, and Maggie felt a warmth she hadn't known since Tom's last days. After, people shared their own stories, their voices weaving a tapestry of Willow Creek's heart. A young man, inspired by Maggie, read a poem about his grandfather, a World War II vet. An older woman spoke of her sister, a seamstress who'd clothed the town's poor. Maggie recorded it all, her tape recorder a quiet witness. Lily projected the website on a screen, showing the growing collection, and announced plans for a digital archive, funded by donations from the event. The library's roof would be fixed, thanks to Maggie's spark.as. The night ended, Sarah approached, hugging Maggie tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," she whispered. "I didn't get it before, but I do now." Maggie's throat tightened, tears spilling over. They sat together, sharing memories of Tom, of library days, of the years they'd lost. It wasn't a full healing, but it was a start, a bridge built by stories and love. Maggie drove home, the Ohio night clear, stars bright above the fields. She thought of Musk's Tesla, each car a step toward a cleaner world. Her book was her clean world, free of the emissions of regret and silence. She opened her journal and wrote, Step 10, Shape the Legacy. Let it grow. She dedicated the night's stories to Tom, to Sarah, to Willow Creek, her pen steady despite the ache in her fingers. The next day, Maggie and Sarah sat at the kitchen table, planning a trip to a Tesla factory in Fremont, a symbolic nod to Maggie's journey. "I want to see what inspired you," Sarah said, smiling. Maggie nodded, her heart full. The factory wasn't her world, but its spirit, building boldly, defying limits, was. Her book, her town, her daughter, they were her legacy, taking shape with every step. Outside, the sun rose over Willow Creek, painting the fields gold. Maggie stood at her window, the journal in her hands, and whispered, "This is mine." The words were a vow, a legacy written in stories, love, and a refusal to fade. Maggie Thompson stood on her porch, the Ohio morning crisp with the scent of frost-kissed grass and the faint tang of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. At 68, she felt a quiet strength, her body still aching from arthritis and the lingering threat of her heart condition, but her spirit buoyed by the success of the Willow Creek storytelling event. Her journal, tucked under her arm, held a new entry, Step 10, Shape the Legacy. Let it grow. The self-published draft of Small Town Heroes sat on her kitchen table, its pages filled with Clara Jenkins, Chief Bradley, Mr. Hayes, and June's father, dedicated to Tom and Sarah. The website Lily had built was now at 3,000 visitors, its stories sparking comments on X from across the country. Sarah's visit last week, their tearful reconciliation, had lit a fire in Maggie's heart, one that burned brighter than her doubts. The storytelling event had been a revelation. The library, glowing with string lights, had drawn over 50 people, locals, strangers, even a reporter from a Columbus paper. Maggie's readings from her book had moved the crowd to tears, and their own stories, poems, memories, tributes, had woven Willow Creek's past into a living tapestry. The event raised enough to fix the library's roof, and Lily's digital archive was taking shape, preserving the town's history for generations. Sarah's pride, "I'm so proud of you, Mom," echoed in Maggie's mind, a bridge rebuilt after 3 years of silence. But Maggie knew her journey wasn't over. The book, the website, her health, they were still works in progress, fragile but growing, like the electric spark of a Tesla battery. Today, Maggie was meeting Lily and Ruth at the library to plan the next steps. She drove her Buick through Willow Creek's quiet streets, the fields golden under a clear autumn sky. The library smelled of old books and fresh paint, the roof repairs already underway. Lily greeted her with a grin, her tablet open to the website's analytics, 3,500 visitors, with emails from as far as Texas and Oregon, people sharing stories of their own small-town heroes. "You've started something big, Mrs. Thompson," Lily said, her ponytail bouncing. "We're getting requests for you to speak, at schools, other libraries. You're a movement." Maggie laughed, the idea absurd yet thrilling. "I'm just telling stories," she said, but her heart swelled. She thought of Elon Musk's words from a Tesla keynote she'd watched, "Every step forward creates ripples. You don't see the impact until it spreads." Her book was her ripple, spreading beyond Willow Creek, touching lives she'd never meet. It wasn't just about Clara or Bradley, it was about proving that age, loss, and doubt couldn't stop a dream. Maggie's dream was alive, carried by her town, her daughter, and her own stubborn heart. Ruth joined them, carrying a box of flyers for a new project, a writing workshop for Willow Creek's youth, inspired by Maggie's work. "You're a mentor now," Ruth said, her silver hair gleaming. "Kids want to learn how to tell stories like you do." Maggie's throat tightened, memories of her teaching days flooding back, classrooms filled with eager faces, her voice bringing history to life. She'd thought those days were gone, but now, at 68, she was teaching again, not with a chalkboard but with her book, her website, her example. They spent the morning planning the workshop, Maggie's tape recorder ready to capture the kids' stories. Lily suggested a section on the website for young writers, a place for them to share their own heroes. "It's like Tesla's mission," Lily said, her eyes bright. "You're building a sustainable future, not for cars, but for stories." Maggie nodded, the comparison striking. Musk's vision for a zero-emission world was about persistence, about creating something lasting. Maggie's book, her workshops, her website, they were her zero-emission legacy, free of the regrets and silence that had weighed her down. That afternoon, Maggie met with a group of high school students at the library, their faces a mix of curiosity and shyness. She shared Clara's story, reading from her book, her voice steady despite the ache in her hands. The kids listened, rapt, then shared their own ideas, stories of grandparents, neighbors, even a teacher who'd inspired them. Maggie recorded it all, her heart full. One girl, Mia, lingered after, clutching a notebook. "I want to write like you," she said. "Can you help me?" Maggie smiled, her eyes stinging. "We'll help each other," she said, and meant it. The ripple effect grew beyond the library. At the diner, locals stopped Maggie to share more stories, their voices eager, their pride palpable. The Columbus Reporter called, wanting an interview for a feature on small-town revitalization. Maggie's website became a hub, with Lily adding new pages weekly, stories of a Depression-era grocer, a coach, a seamstress. Donations poured in, not just for the library but for Maggie's project, enough to fund more workshops and a second printing of her book. She thought of Musk's Tesla, each car a step toward a cleaner world. Her stories were her steps, each one clearing the air of her own doubts, building a future where Willow Creek's heart shone, but the strain remained. Maggie's arthritis flared, her fingers stiff as she typed, and Dr. Patel's warnings echoed, "Pace yourself." She'd had no chest pains since starting her new meds, but fatigue clung to her, a reminder of her limits. Sarah called daily now, her voice warmer but still cautious. "You're doing so much, Mom," she said one evening. "Just don't burn out, okay?" Maggie heard the love behind the worry, but it stung, a faint echo of their old fights. She wanted Sarah to see her strength, not her frailty. To ease the load, Maggie leaned on Lily and Ruth, letting them handle website updates and workshop logistics. She thought of Musk's team at Tesla, how no one built alone. Her community was her team, carrying her dream when her body faltered. She and Sarah planned their trip to the Tesla factory in Fremont, a symbolic journey to see the spark that had inspired her. "I want to understand what drives you," Sarah said, her smile soft over the phone. Maggie's heart swelled, the trip a chance to rebuild their bond, to show Sarah the fire that kept her going. The night before the workshop's first session, Maggie sat at her kitchen table, the laptop glowing, the journal open. She wrote, "Step 11, let the ripples spread. Teach others to dream." The words felt like a vow, a commitment to her town, her daughter, herself. She opened X, posting an update, "Small Town Heroes is growing, thanks to Willow Creek. Join our youth workshop to tell your stories." The shares climbed, comments flooding in, "You're inspiring my kids," and "This is what community means." Maggie smiled, the negativity, why bother? Now just static, drowned out by the voices that believed. She thought of Tom, his voice from years ago, "You're gonna make people see, Maggie." She was doing it, not just for him but for Sarah, for Mia, for Willow Creek. The book, the website, the workshops, they were her legacy, a clean slate free of regret. She stood, her knees aching but her spirit light, and walked to the window. The Ohio night was clear, stars bright above the fields. She imagined driving a Tesla with Sarah, the road open, the future theirs. Maggie whispered, "This is for us," her words a promise to keep going, to let the ripples spread, to build a legacy that would outlive her. The journal in her hands felt like a torch, passed to her town, her daughter, the kids she'd teach. She was driving toward her own zero-emission future, powered by stories, love, and a refusal to fade. Maggie Thompson stood at the podium in the Willow Creek Library, the air warm with the scent of fresh coffee and the faint must of old books, a familiar comfort that grounded her. The Ohio evening was crisp, the autumn sky a deep indigo beyond the windows, stars glinting like promises. At 68, Maggie felt the weight of her journey, her arthritis, her heart condition, the years of regret and silence. But also a lightness, a spark that had grown into a flame. Her journal, tucked in her purse beside her tape recorder, held her final entry, "Step 11, let the ripples spread. Teach others to dream." Tonight, she'd speak at the Youth Writing Workshop's closing event, a celebration of small-town heroes, her book, her legacy, now a beacon for her town and beyond. The library was alive, string lights casting a soft glow over folding chairs filled with locals, students, and strangers drawn by the Columbus News feature. Maggie's website, built with Lily's help, had surpassed 5,000 visitors, its pages, Clara Jenkins, Chief Bradley, Mr. Hayes, June's father, and more, sparking stories from across the country. Her self-published book, Small Town Heroes, had sold 200 copies, modest but monumental for Maggie, each sale a testament to her refusal to fade. Sarah sat in the front row, her smile bright, their reconciliation a quiet miracle after 3 years of estrangement. The chest pains hadn't returned since her new meds, and though Dr. Patel's warnings lingered, Maggie felt stronger, carried by her town, her daughter, her purpose. She adjusted her glasses, her hands steady despite the ache in her fingers, and began. "I thought I was done," she said, her voice clear, resonating in the hushed room. "At 68, I thought my story was over, that I was too old to change. But I was wrong. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." The crowd leaned in, their faces a mix of pride and emotion. Maggie held up her book, its simple cover, Willow Creek's library sketched in black and white, a symbol of her journey. "These stories, Clara's, Bradley's, yours, they're proof that no one's ever done, not if you act, not if you dream." She read from the book, her words weaving Clara's candlelit readings, Bradley's firelit courage, Hayes' snowy bus routes, and the nurse's midnight kindnesses. The room was silent, then erupted in applause, tears shining in Ruth's eyes, Lily's grin wide, Sarah's hands clasped tight. Maggie's heart swelled, the moment of victory not just for her but for Willow Creek. She thought of Elon Musk's words, from a Tesla keynote she'd watched, "The future is built by those who act." She'd acted, written, taught, rebuilt her bond with Sarah. And her actions had rippled, lighting up her town, her life. The workshop students took the stage, sharing their own stories, poems about grandparents, essays about neighbors, tributes to unsung heroes. Mia, the shy girl who'd asked for Maggie's help, read a piece about her mother, a single parent who'd worked double shifts to keep their family afloat. "Mrs. Thompson taught me to see her as a hero," Mia said, her voice trembling but strong. Maggie's eyes stung, her throat tight. She'd been a teacher once, shaping young minds with history. Now, she was teaching them to shape their own legacies. After the readings, the crowd mingled, the library buzzing with voices and laughter. Ruth announced that the workshop would become a yearly event, funded by donations sparked by Maggie's book. Lily unveiled a new website section for student stories, linked to the digital archive, ensuring Willow Creek's history would live on. The reporter from Columbus approached, her notebook open. "Maggie, you've revitalized this town," she said. "What's next?" Maggie smiled, her heart full. "More stories," she said. "There's always more." Sarah pulled her aside, her eyes wet. "Mom, this is incredible. I didn't understand before, but I do now. You're not just writing, you're building something." Maggie hugged her, the embrace fierce, years of silence melting away. "It's for us, too," Maggie whispered, echoing her message to Sarah weeks ago. They talked about their upcoming trip to the Tesla factory in Fremont, a journey to see the spark that had inspired Maggie. "I want to feel what you feel," Sarah said, her smile soft. "That drive to keep going." Maggie thought of Musk's Tesla, each car a step toward a zero-emission future, a world free of fossil fuels' weight. Her book was her zero-emission future, free of regret, silence, and invisibility. She'd shed the emissions of her past, her abandoned dreams, her grief over Tom, her estrangement from Sarah, and built something new. The chest pains, the arthritis, the doubters on X, why bother? Hadn't stopped her. She'd faced her breaking point and kept going, just as Musk had with Tesla's darkest days. Later, Maggie and Sarah drove to the diner, the Ohio night clear, the stars a canopy above the fields. They sat in a vinyl booth, the smell of bacon and coffee wrapping them in comfort. Sarah scrolled through the website on her phone, reading comments aloud. "This book is my town's soul," and, "Maggie, you're an inspiration." They laughed, shared stories of Tom, of library days with Clara, of the years they'd lost and were now reclaiming. "I'm sorry I pulled away," Sarah said, her voice low. I was hurting, but I see you now, Mom. Really see you. Maggie's throat tightened, tears spilling over. I see you, too, she said, squeezing Sarah's hand. The diner's jukebox played a soft country tune, and Maggie felt whole, not perfect, but whole. Her book, her workshops, her town, they were her legacy, a bridge between past and future, built with love and persistence. The next day, Maggie returned to the library, helping Lily upload the student stories. Mia's piece about her mother was the first, paired with a photo of her smiling at a school event. Maggie typed a caption, "A new generation of heroes, inspired by Willow Creek." The website was a living thing now, growing with every story, every voice. She thought of Musk's Tesla factory, a place where ideas became reality, where the future was built. Her library was her factory, her stories her cars, driving toward a world where no one felt forgotten. Maggie opened her journal, writing, Step 12, Live the Legacy. Never stop. The words were a vow, a final promise to herself, to Tom, to Sarah, to Willow Creek. She'd mentor more students, write more stories, keep the ripples spreading. Her health was fragile, but she'd pace herself, lean on her team, Lily, Ruth, Sarah. She thought of Tom's voice, years ago, "You're gonna make people see, Maggie." She had, and she would. That evening, Maggie stood on her porch, the Ohio sky a canvas of stars. Sarah had left for Columbus, promising weekly calls, their bond stronger than ever. Maggie held her journal, its pages a map of her transformation, from a widow lost in regret to a woman who'd changed her town. She imagined driving a Tesla, its quiet power carrying her toward a horizon she'd built. Her book, her stories, her love, they were her power, her clean future, free of the weight of what might have been. I was never too old, Maggie whispered, her voice steady. I was just waiting to matter again. The words hung in the air, a truth that lit her heart. She stepped inside, the journal in her hands, and sat at her kitchen table, the laptop glowing. She opened a new document, typing, Willow Creek's heroes are not done. Neither am I. The cursor blinked, ready for the next story, the next step, the next ripple in her legacy. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?